Zero ships. That is the coalition the United States has assembled to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Trump asked 7 nations. 7 said no, publicly, on the record. But here is what nobody is connecting. The same week, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Greece, and the Netherlands all refused to send a warship to Hormuz. And then Italy, the Netherlands, Spain, and Greece all sent aircraft to Cyprus. No hesitation, no debate. They came. Same alliance, same week. Completely opposite answer. If these countries are willing to mobilize military assets in the same region, why won't they touch Hormuz? The answer is not about capability. It is not about risk. And it is not about politics. It is about one word that the White House has not said out loud. We will get to it. But first, the confirmed sequence. On March 14th, Trump named China, France, Japan, South Korea, and the United Kingdom on Truth Social. He said the strait would be made open, safe, and free. He expected many countries to send warships. No response. He told the Financial Times a refusal would be, his exact words, very bad for the future of NATO. Still no response. Then UN Ambassador Mike Waltz went on television and used a word that shifted the entire framing. He said the United States welcomes, encourages, and even demands Allied participation. Demands. That is not the language of a government assembling a coalition. That is the language of a government that has already lost one. UK Prime Minister Starmer. This was never envisioned to be a NATO mission. Germany's Defense Minister Pistorius. 7 words. This is not our war. We have not started it. France agreed to a possible future mission when circumstances permit, meaning after the shooting stops, which means he agreed to nothing. Spain's Defense Minister Robles. The war must end now. Canada declined. Australia said no request had been received and they were not prepared to offer support. Japan, reviewing options, no plans to send ships. Greece, no. Italy, diplomacy must prevail. Then the EU weighed in collectively. Foreign Policy Chief Callas said, this is a direct quote, "Nobody wants to go actively into this war. 0 ships. That is where we are. Now, the Cyprus question. On March the 1st, a Hezbollah drone struck RAF Akrotiri, the British Royal Air Force base on the southern tip of Cyprus. 2 more drones were intercepted the following day. On March 4th, Greek F-16s scrambled and destroyed 2 Iranian-type drones over Lebanese airspace before they reached the island. Italy sent defensive assets. The Netherlands contributed interceptor capability. Spain mobilized air defense resources. Britain deployed Martlet missile-armed helicopters specifically for drone defense. 4 European nations mobilized, fast, for Cyprus. NATO Secretary General Rutte said on March 3rd the alliance will defend every inch of NATO territory. These are the exact same countries that told Trump no on Hormuz. This is where the strategic picture changes. The distinction is not willingness, it is legitimacy. RAF Akrotiri and Dikalia are British overseas territories. When Hezbollah drones struck them, Article 5 of the NATO treaty applied. An armed attack against one ally is an attack against all. Allied mobilization carried legal authority, institutional framework, and domestic political cover. Every soldier sent to Cyprus went under a recognized mandate. The Strait of Hormuz has none of that architecture. Operation Epic Fury launched without a UN Security Council mandate, without NATO authorization, without congressional approval. The War Powers resolution forcing a vote is still pending. 7 NATO members publicly stated the operation undermines international peace and security. 3 of those 7 are now being asked to send ships into the same conflict zone. Every capital that considers deploying a warship to Hormuz runs the same internal calculation. Doing so means formally joining a war launched without their consultation, without legal international sanction, and against the explicit position of their own populations. Any European leader who puts sailors in the Persian Gulf under these conditions is making a domestic political decision from which they cannot recover, but that is not the real pressure point. Here's what most coverage has missed entirely. Iran is not blocking the strait. Iran is using the strait as a sorting mechanism. Foreign Minister Araghchi stated it on CBS News on March 15th. The Strait of Hormuz is open. It is only closed to American, Israeli, and Allied vessels. Others are free to pass. And Tehran proved it operationally. A Pakistani-flagged Aframax tanker transited the strait on March 16th, carrying Abu Dhabi crude. 2 Indian LPG carriers passed through safely. A Turkish vessel received clearance. France and the United Kingdom have reportedly opened back-channel talks with Tehran about securing passage for their own commercial vessels. China is in direct negotiations for guaranteed access to Iranian crude and Qatari LNG shipments. Follow that to its conclusion. Every Allied capital now faces a binary choice. Join Trump's convoy mission and guarantee that Iran classifies your ships as hostile targets, or negotiate directly with Tehran and keep your oil flowing. Washington is offering its partners the privilege of becoming combatants. Tehran is offering them the privilege of becoming customers. For any government making that calculation under energy price pressure, the answer is not complicated. Now here is the unexpected connection that no current analysis has assembled. The United States temporarily lifted sanctions on Russian crude oil at sea to offset the Hormuz supply disruption. Treasury Secretary Bessent confirmed the authorization. Moscow and Washington are now discussing energy market stabilization cooperation. Russia, NATO's primary strategic adversary, the country NATO exists to confront, has become a functional partner in managing the consequences of the American military operation in Iran. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kallas said it directly. The Hormuz closure is funneling revenue into Moscow's war machine. Every dollar that oil rises above 70 is another dollar funding Russia's campaign in Ukraine. Washington is asking European capitals to send destroyers to the Persian Gulf, while its own Treasury Department is simultaneously authorizing Russian oil sales. That contradiction is not a messaging problem. It is policy, and every European defense ministry has noticed it. China has not fired a single shot. It has not deployed a ship, a drone, or a diplomatic intervention. It has simply waited. And what China is positioned to receive, if Tehran's yuan-denominated passage arrangement is formalized, is the most significant expansion of yuan oil trade in history, delivered not by Chinese strategy, but by an American military operation that China had no role in starting. Now the economics. One data point that will surprise most viewers. On March 11th, the International Energy Agency announced the largest emergency reserve release in its 52-year history, 400 million barrels across 32 nations. The United States alone contributed 172 million barrels from a strategic petroleum reserve that contains 415 million total. That is 41% of America's entire emergency oil stockpile. Crude climbed 17% in the days after the announcement. The release has not stabilized prices. Iraq's southern oil production has collapsed 70%. Kuwait has announced precautionary output cuts. Global LNG supply is down 20%. There's no combination of reserves, pipelines, and alternate routes that closes a 12 million barrel per day structural deficit. Every day the strait remains under Iranian control. The pressure on allied governments to reach a bilateral arrangement with Tehran increases, not through military defeat, through pure economic mathematics. This brings us to South Korea and Japan, the two actors who will determine whether Trump's coalition exists at all. South Korea has 20 commercial vessels isolated in the strait right now. Both the ruling Democratic Party and the opposition People Power Party have united in demanding parliamentary approval before any warship deployment, the first time both parties have agreed on anything in months. A former deputy commander of the Korea-U.S. Combined Forces Command told the Korea Times on March 16th that hasty participation would be extremely dangerous. Seoul has simultaneously confirmed it is opening diplomatic channels with Tehran. In 2020, South Korea secured Iranian understanding for a similar deployment by explicitly not joining the U.S.-led maritime security coalition. That precedent exists, and every South Korean lawmaker knows it. Japan's Prime Minister Takaichi travels to Washington tomorrow. U.S. officials have signaled a formal request will be made to deploy Japanese self-defense forces to Hormuz. Japanese law limits overseas deployments to non-combat roles without special parliamentary authorization, a process that takes weeks. And Japan, like South Korea, is one of the largest Hormuz-dependent energy importers on Earth. If Japan and South Korea say no, and the structural incentives point toward no, the coalition Trump declared forming has failed before it launched. 3 indicators in the next 72 hours. Watch Japan's response after tomorrow's Trump-Takaichi summit. A Japanese commitment would pressure South Korea to follow. A conditional or post-ceasefire-only response means the coalition is functionally dead. This is the most consequential diplomatic decision either country will make this week. Watch whether France or the United Kingdom publicly confirm back-channel talks with Tehran on commercial passage. That confirmation would mean NATO members are formally negotiating with Iran to secure the access that American military posture is supposed to guarantee, not just refusing the coalition, but actively circumventing it. And watch the South Korean National Assembly. A parliamentary vote is the mechanism by which Seoul either joins or definitively declines. How fast it moves, and which way it goes, will tell you whether Seoul's 20 trapped vessels become the lever that pulls South Korea into the conflict, or the leverage that pulls South Korea toward Tehran. Here's the question this conflict has not yet answered. The United States has suppressed Iran's missile launches by 90%. It has eliminated more than 20 Iranian naval vessels. It has driven the Iranian surface fleet to port. Militarily, it is winning every conventional exchange. And yet the Strait of Hormuz is closed to American ships. The largest reserve release in history has not stabilized prices. 0 allies have committed forces. And France and Britain, America's closest European partners, are quietly calling Tehran. Iran did not close the strait with missiles. It closed the strait with a policy. And that policy is doing something no missile could do. It is making America's allies choose between Washington and their own economies. Watch the ships that are not moving. They are telling you more than the bombs that are falling.